I'm Katrina Raynon-Woodward, and I have the great privilege of being the Program Director and Principal Consultant at Melbourne Business School's Executive Education. I'd like to warmly welcome you, be you staff, students, alumni and guests, to the Lunchtime Masterclass series. Today, it's the dynamics of change, embrace change with confidence and lead with clarity. So I'd like to begin by acknowledging the Wurundjeri people who are the traditional owners of the land on which I am today, and pay my respects to all Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander elders past and present. I also pay my respects to their communities who've shared and practiced their teaching over thousands of years. We recognise Aboriginal and Torres Strait Islander people's ongoing leadership and contribution to business, education, industry and society. So if you're a regular on these sessions, you'll know that Melbourne Business School's vision is unleashing leaders for a sustainable future. And we do this by creating and sharing knowledge to help people guide and shape the future of business, government and the for-purpose sector. Events like today's masterclass offer ongoing learning and access to contemporary thinking in business and leadership, and is just one of the many ways of supporting the school's commitment to lifelong learning. If you have any questions during the session, please drop them in the Q&A box, and I'll make sure that we have some time at the end to answer any of your specific questions. I'm going to say we've got a real treat for you today. I'm delighted to introduce our special guest presenter today, Aviva Berzon. Aviva is the Program Director on Managing and Leading Change Program. Aviva wears many hats at MBS. She's an employment lawyer by background. She's a certified mediator and an executive coach with a master's in organisational leadership and change. Over the last decade, her experience working with leaders as a consultant and running custom leadership and change programs has meant that she's helped hundreds of leaders, possibly thousands, to manage and change in their teams and organisations, and also helping them to navigate the change for themselves with increased self-awareness and insight. She really doesn't need much more of an introduction than that. And so, Aviva, welcome to this masterclass series. It's delightful to see you here, and we're really looking forward to what you have to say today.
Thanks, Katrina, and welcome to everybody sitting at home, whether you are at home or whether you are in an office at the moment. It's a Friday, so hopefully a few of you are working from home. And for those of you in Melbourne, I went for a walk with the dog this morning and I smelt the beautiful spring air. So I hope we can all enjoy the Friday spring feeling. So today we are talking about the dynamics of change and leading through change with clarity. And a lot of that is about leading others through change. And a lot of it also is understanding yourself through change. An expression I like to say is, wherever you go, there you are. Wherever you go, there you are. And so knowing yourself and a little bit about your own preferences when it comes to change can be really, really powerful in not only navigating change for yourself, but setting the example for others if you are a leader or a manager of change. And that's what today's all about. It's about understanding change style preferences, and there are 3 that we are going to look at. It's about identifying your own change style preference, and recognizing how you might be similar or different from others will help you leverage those differences, which might otherwise sometimes be a source of conflict. And it's important to recognize that change is as much about people as it is about a plan and a process and guiding people through change. And a lot of that can sometimes be met with a bit of resistance. When we talk about change, people generally are for it, support. Who wants to change? Well, that's where sometimes their eyes are averted and people are not necessarily as excited. And then who wants to lead change? Sometimes there are crickets. Everyone thinks of changing the world, but no one thinks of changing himself. Leo Tolstoy. I don't know that it's necessarily that extreme, but often we're looking outwards. We're looking at the system. We're looking at others. We're focusing on how do we get them on board? And the first question I think we need to ask is, where am I? And how do I get myself on board? Am I on board or not? Be the change you want to see in the world. I guess that sums it up. Gandhi said a few wise things, and I think that's very much in that category. And the message from, so far from the start is leaders go first. To lead others through change, you need to lead yourself. And this does begin with self-awareness around your own response to change. Interestingly, working with many groups on the topic of change, the overriding theme that comes up again and again and again is that your role with regards to change has a big impact on how you experience the change. If you are the initiator of change, if you are the driver of change, if you are the person that's leading the change, it can mean a lot of feelings, big feelings. Change does involve emotions. Ignoring the emotional side of things will be to your detriment if you are a leader of change, because it's a big factor. But where you are the one who is involved in driving the change, I hear people talk about it as being challenging, demanding, burdensome, but also exciting, rewarding, sometimes thrilling. When I talk to people who are purely on the receiving end of change, they often talk about it as, by and large, being an unpleasant experience. I hear words like confusing, overwhelming, shocking, sometimes leading to resignation. If it's constantly coming down at you and you feel like you have no autonomy in the matter, it can be quite a sometimes devastating experience. So the first message is, as much as you can make change being done by others, with others, not just to or upon them, that's going to reduce resistance and get more people on board. In addition to this, though, our own change style preferences, the way we personally respond to change, has a big impact on how we experience change. And that's what we're going to delve into over this masterclass. In particular, we're looking at a model called the Change Style Indicator. It's actually a tool. There's a diagnostic that goes with this. And the research and anecdotal evidence as well really does confirm that there are three predominant ways that we can respond to change. 25% of us on average are conservers, meaning we like to conserve what's already working and we prefer slow and incremental change. 25% of us are originators, meaning we want big and expansive change. And then 25 and 50% of us, it's the remaining majority, the overwhelming majority, are pragmatists. We often say, it depends. What's pragmatic in this situation? What makes sense? And how does it impact people? And that's what we're going to look at. But before we do, I'm going to ask us to do a very, very technical exercise. For those of you at home or at your desks, please grab a pen, find a piece of paper, and with your dominant hand, put your pen in your dominant hand. I'll just give you all a moment to find our tools for this technical experiment. Any piece of paper will do, any pen will do. And once you have your devices, put your pen in your dominant hand and sign your signature. And once you've done with that, take that pen, put it into your dominant hand, and do the exact same thing. And I might give you a little bit more time for that one. Once you've done that, I'm going to ask, and please feel free to write your words in chat. Katrina will help me pull out some of the general observations. What was it like to sign with your dominant hand? What was it like to sign with your dominant hand? Put in a word. One word is absolutely fine. All right, what are we seeing coming through? So what was it like to sign with your dominant hand? Was it fast? Was it easy? What was it like for you? What are we seeing, Katrina?
We're seeing things like easy, natural, comfortable, familiar, confusing, brainless. I like that one.
Let's see, yeah. Didn't have to think.
Regular, comfortable, weird, automatic.
Maybe they've gone, those who've written weird have gone to the next question, which is exactly where I'm going. What was it like to sign with your non-dominant hand? When you flipped into your other hand, what was it like?
Not normal. It took more energy. Crap. Uncomfortable, challenging, odd, frustrating. Had to think about it.
Yeah.
You have to concentrate, and Nicole has suggested relearning.
Yeah, it's like rewiring what is otherwise automatic. Yeah. Now I'm going to ask all of you, and thank you for your responses from your screens. Now, imagine I'd said to you, you were going to be practicing signing with your non-dominant hand every day for the next 3 months. You'll be signing with your non-dominant hand. I'd imagine you would all feel more comfortable. I'd imagine it would feel almost natural, almost natural. However, if I came to you and you'd been practicing with your non-dominant hand, been signing away day by day, but I came to you in the middle of a day where maybe it's a Friday afternoon, you're thinking about the weekend already, but you've also got a lot on, you've got some urgent deadlines, you're rushed, maybe you're stressed, you're panicked, you've got a million and one things on your head, and I put a contract in front of you to sign. Which hand do you think you'd go for to sign with? Just put in dominant or non-dominant in chat. Yeah, I'm seeing a lot of dominant hands. Yeah, absolutely. If I was a betting person, I would put my money on dominant hand as well. So thank you for those of you who have contributed to chat. There'll be a few more opportunities. And you might be thinking, what's the connection? Why are we signing hands, using pens to sign with our hands when we're talking about change style preferences? And that's exactly the question I posed to you rhetorically. Why are we doing this in the context of change style preferences? And the idea is, when you came out of the womb, you didn't say, I would like to be right-handed or left-handed. It just happened. It was hardwired into you. In the same way, change style preferences are hardwired into you. You were born with a preference that's either conserver, pragmatist, or originator. Having said that, just like you practiced in theory signing with your non-dominant hand, you can absolutely operate from different preferences. And I'm sure, as for many of you who are listening on the screen, as you've gone through your career, your jobs required you to lean into the different preferences, which will make more sense as we go through this masterclass. However, when you are stressed, when you are rushed, when you are panicked, chances are, just like you would sign with your dominant hand, when you don't think about it, when it's automatic, you probably default to your natural change style preference, which is something that's really good to be aware of. You can definitely operate out of preference, but it's good to know some of those default settings. So let's get right into it. The change style indicator was developed by Musselwhite and Ingram, and it measures individual styles in approaching change. The idea being that through increasing your own self-awareness, this allows for increased flexibility and effectiveness in your response to change, while also enhancing an understanding and an appreciation of the reactions of others. So a few points to think about that sets the scene, and then we're going to get right into understanding the nuances about these preferences. So as already mentioned, style reflects aspects of personality or neurological preferences, just like right or left-handedness. It's something that's hardwired into us. It does not, however, indicate effectiveness at utilizing a particular style. You might be a conserver, originator, or pragmatist, and very effective at going through and leading change, or ineffective. All your style tells you is your dominant preference, not your skills with regards to leading change. So it's important to point out that no style is good or bad, better or worse. And no style is actually better or worse at leading change or helping others move through change. It's just understanding what you focus on. And importantly, understanding different styles does help reduce conflict, because you start seeing how we can leverage the difference rather than it being a point of contention, which I predict, when you've got different styles asking for different things and operating out of their own preferences, can sometimes be frustrating, grating, annoying, and a whole lot of other words that might come to mind as we talk through these preferences. So let's get right into it. As I already mentioned, conservers prefer slow and incremental change, a slow and incremental approach to change, and really conserving what's already working. Let's make use of that. Originators want big, fast, expansive change. And pragmatists, well, it depends where you are on the continuum. You might be a pragmatist with a bit of a conserver leaning. You might be a pragmatist with a bit of an originator leaning. But on the whole, pragmatists are very pragmatic. What makes sense in this situation? And how does it impact people? What I'm going to do over the next few slides is drill down a little bit into each of these preferences. And as you're listening, think, does this sound like me? I think you'll know pretty quickly which of these preferences is your home, your familiar place. So let's get into it. Conservers prefer current circumstances to the unknown. The goal of a conserver is to better utilise existing resources. Conservers prefer change that's slow, gradual, and incremental, as mentioned. If you, sitting and watching this webinar, are a conserver, you are probably going to appear to be deliberate, disciplined, and organised. You will probably enjoy predictability. You may operate from conventional assumptions, and you may focus on details and routine. So just think to yourself for a minute, does that sound like me? And if this is you, you probably don't have to think too long, you know. Then we have the originators. Originators prefer a faster and more radical approach to change. They like change that's significant and expansive. And the goal of the originator is to challenge existing systems and structures, looking for those fundamentally different changes, big changes. If you're an originator, you're sitting watching this and think, am I an originator? Consider if these next statements feel true for you. Originators can appear visionary and systemic in their thinking. So you're visionary about the future and you're looking how the different parts of the system interconnect and affect each other. You enjoy risk and uncertainty. You may appear to be disorganized, undisciplined, unconventional, and spontaneous. You're probably going to be the one who's challenging accepted systems and structures. Now, not necessarily outwardly, but in your head, you'll be thinking, how can things be done differently? How can things be done better? And you may be impractical, miss important details, disregard accepted policies and procedures. So think to yourself, does that sound like me? And again, if you are an originator, you probably don't have to think for too long. It will feel very familiar. I see Katrina smiling. I think I know who you are based on past conversations. All right, and then pragmatists. Pragmatists may be comfortable with both the conserver and originator styles, depending on the circumstances. A pragmatist will often say, well, it depends. Pragmatists are most interested in what will work in the current situation and prefer to explore change in an open and an objective way without a preconceived preference for preserving or disrupting the status quo. And as mentioned, depending on where you are in the continuum, you may be a pragmatist with a conserver orientation, so there'll be a bit of a flavour of the conserver style, or a bit more of an originator orientation. Or you might be a true conserver, a pragmatist rather, meaning you're very much in the middle. All right. If you are a pragmatist, you will appear to be practical, agreeable, and flexible. You're going to prefer change that produces workable outcomes, what makes sense and works in this situation. And you are pretty much almost always going to be far more interested in results than structure. What are we working towards rather than necessarily what's the structure to get there? You're probably also the one who's usually capable of seeing multiple perspectives, both sides of the situation, and trying to bring those perspectives together, help people feel heard. You may take more of a middle-of-the-road approach, and sometimes you might feel like you're the one sitting on the fence. And you'll usually appear to be team-orientated, bringing people on the journey. So have a think to yourself, is that me? Am I a pragmatist? And again, 50% of the population, and I've done this with many groups, so my experience backs it up. Usually you get a really strong middle of pragmatists. So think, does that sound like me? Importantly, no one style is better or worse. Each have their strengths and each have their risks. At their best, conservers are steady, reliable, consistent. They move forward, they follow processes, they get things done well. Downsides, they can be rigid and they might be slow to initiate change, which makes sense because the conservers are probably thinking about what have we done already? What's already working? Have we thought through the risks? Have we considered all of the details? By which time sometimes the ship has already started sailing. That's the risk with the conservative approach. Pragmatists, they facilitate, cooperate, mediate. At their best, they're bringing people together and helping people be heard and feel heard. Downsides, they can be indecisive and suppress healthy conflict. Pragmatists want people to feel heard and usually have a preference for harmony. So if they are noticing that people around them are getting into what I would sometimes consider healthy, robust discussion, but they see that the emotions are rising, they might try and settle things down, create harmony again, which sometimes can happen a bit prematurely. And as a result, some of that necessary conversation may not be happening. Originators at their best create vision, energy, novelty, inspire towards newness. Downsides can be impatient and pose risks to implementation, possibly because they're not interested in the details or they haven't thought through it. They're waiting for somebody else to do the implementation while maybe that's not been delegated, and they've potentially already directed their focus onto the next big thing. No style is better or worse. Each has its strengths, each has its downsides. So I want you to now, again, get your pen, get your paper, and draw yourself a line exactly like this. Draw a horizontal line. At one end, mark C for conserver. At the other end, mark O for originator. And in the middle, mark a spot for pragmatist. And I want you to mark yourself somewhere on the line. Without overthinking it, just intuitively, mark yourself somewhere over the line.
Aviva, might I ask you, I'm just going to test your capacity for leading and managing change. Would it be
Sure.
possible to just go back and do 20 seconds on each of those styles, please? So the conservative, the
Absolutely.
pragmatist, and the originator, because I'm just trying to get my head around
Yep.
where I might put myself on that continuum.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So, conservers, if you are a conserver, your focus will usually be on what's already working, what's in play, and in the context of change, have we thought through the timelines? Have we got a plan? How are we thinking about this? What are the risks? Have we considered the risks? If your mind is going to detail or risk mitigation, strong chance is that you are a conserver. If you're the person who's getting itchy, right? You want change to happen. You're looking at the future and you're either thinking about the possibilities or you might be thinking about if we don't move, we're going to be behind in 5 years' time. We're going to be lagging behind. And you might be sometimes a bit frustrated at the rate of change in the organization because you see what other people may not be seeing. You might also be the person who's got the cluttered desk, who's got a lot of ideas in your head, always kind of thinking and talking big, but not such a fan of the detail, not really interested, or perhaps overwhelmed by the detail. You're probably an originator. If both styles kind of resonate for you because you can go one way or the other, depending on the situation, if you're the person who often says, well, it depends. If you feel like sometimes I'm for change, sometimes I'm against, but really I'm inconsistent because it so depends on the current circumstances. And if you're a person who's thinking, have people been included? Have people felt heard? Have we done enough focus groups? What effort are we making to bring people on the journey? If that's where your mind is going, typically in the context of change, you're a pragmatist. So conservers typically think about risks, detail, timelines, impacts in terms of almost the micro aspects and focus on what's already working. Originators are usually focused on vision, big picture, future orientation. Pragmatists are usually focused on people and human impacts. Now, that's not to say that a conservator doesn't think about the big picture. That's not to say that a pragmatist doesn't think about the vision. And in fact, all groups typically want to know the why, underlying why. All groups typically want to know a bit of what's in it for me. So there are some human needs that transcend all of this. But where does your mind go first? Where your mind goes first is a good clue of your change style preference. So take a moment and think, am I a conserver? Am I a pragmatist? Am I an originator? And in a moment, you're going to get an opportunity to answer a poll question. It's going to ask you exactly that. Which is your change style preference? And it's a guess, right? You don't have a score or a result or a survey or anything like that. But I think you also know yourself. Most people, I've run this with many groups, and by and large, it's actually astounding exactly where people tend to put themselves on the continuum is exactly, not every time, but with significant regularity, almost as if they were just mirroring the report where they place themselves on the continuum. Because there's something inherently true about this. So select, which is your change style preference? Try not to judge yourself, try not to overthink it, just select which one feels true for you. Are you a conserver? Are you a pragmatist? Are you an originator? And in a moment, we're going to see the split. All right, so are we, Katrina, are we still taking results or have we got the completion yet?
That's complete now.
That is complete. Okay, so interesting. We have a 10% combination of conservers, 14% originators, 76% pragmatists. Wow. 10% conservers, 14% originators, 76 pragmatists. So definitely we have the bell curve, but it's a steep incline towards pragmatist. Interesting that we have more originators in this group than conservers. Also not super surprising, considering this is a masterclass on change. You've all opted to come to this. You might have a rolling leading change. You might have an appetite for change. You might be more focused on change right now. That sometimes when I run a specific change program, and that's actually an interesting observation. When I run a change program, the managing and leading change program, where people who either are change leads or they have a particular remit around a current change program, there tends to be more of a skew towards originators. On the other hand, when I run it with organizations who are in insurance, financial services, somewhat more perhaps conservative industries, we have a bit more of a skew towards conservers. And interestingly enough, I was working with a group just last week that's in that kind of financial services insurance space, and two groups from the same organization. So I worked with two different cohorts. They both had 50% or over 50% being conservers, which is not the consistent usual bell curve I see. And I was thinking, if my pilot who's flying my plane has a conserver orientation, I'm probably going to be very happy with that. I want them to know all the switches. I want them to know how all the processes work. I want them to have studied the manual inside out. I do not want them experimenting on my watch when I'm on the plane. So in an industry where it's very much about perhaps engineering, compliance, processes, you might see a little bit more of a skew towards conserver. In environments where it's about rapid, radical change, pivoting, you might have a little bit more of a skew towards originator. But that's not to say that you don't need a mix. You absolutely 100% need a mix. And what's really interesting is when organizations who have been a bit more traditional, more conservative, and they've hired for that, suddenly they need to pivot. Suddenly they need to change. And I guess COVID was a really potent example where many organizations had to very, very quickly go digital and move online. And a culture that has been a little bit slower to change suddenly has to change really quickly, which can create quite a bit of stress on the leadership and impact the culture in, I think, a positive way. I think it's a good thing to work with the tensions, but you might be sitting there thinking, I've been operating a certain way and it's been rewarded, and that's what my role asks of me, and now I'm having to operate out of preference. And I guess that's a really...
May I just interrupt there? I've got a question from Vinay, which is really centering on what you're talking about at the moment. And Vinay says that no individual will always be conserver or originator
Absolutely.
in real life, and is wondering about economic incentives and organizational dynamics that might, for instance, change a conserver into an originator. So I guess the question is about can you change, and what are some of the things that can change you?
Yeah.
And perhaps underneath that question, what if you find yourself in an organisation that is not really aligned with your change style preference?
Yeah. So the first thing to say, and I can't say this enough, preference does not equate to skill. Your preference has almost nothing to do with your effectiveness at leading change. It just talks to your preference. So over the course of your career, You may have started in a role that's requiring you to follow processes, think about detail. It may have been very detail orientated. And as you progress through your career and the more into senior executive leadership you go, you're going to have to do things that are strategic, that are visionary, that are more about the bigger picture. And so you'll be tapping into different skills over the course of your career. What's important to I guess, appreciate is if you are a conserver, developing a detailed plan, thinking through the risks, looking at detailed timelines, that's probably going to give you a lot more energy than it gives an originator, if we're looking at those two extreme ends, which will mean that that role, if you are somebody who's going to have to look at the detail, but that's not your preference, you can do it well, but you're going to be probably more drained and exhausted by it. So it's the downtime and it's the recovery. Likewise, if you're being asked to be strategic, visionary, drive a change, not so much focus on the implementation, but kind of set the vision and inspire around that, I think anyone can absolutely be effective at that, and you can build skills around that. But if you're a conserver, you're probably going to be in your mind thinking about all of the details and the risks that are not necessarily attended to yet. And thinking in that big picture way, while you could be super, super effective at it, might take more energy. Moving really fast, operating at speed, might be more stressful for you than it would a conserver. And likewise, if you're a pragmatist and you're driving change and you're leading change and you're seeing that there's not enough consultation, inclusion, listening to people, that absolutely doesn't affect your ability to follow the plan and implement change and tell your team what the vision is. But you're probably going to get a little bit more stressed that people aren't being included. So depending on where you sit on the continuum is going to determine, and across your career is going to determine how exhausting, draining, or energizing something might be. Personally, I'm an originator. I've done the survey. I'm a moderate originator. When I started off as a lawyer, I remember I was working with contracts, looking at the detail, and my eyes would start swimming. And I thought, I've been a good student my whole life. I was good at university. What's going on? My peer sitting next to me seemed to be very comfortable with this, but it's taking me longer, or I'm feeling drained after this. And if I could talk to my younger self, I would say to myself, this is just not playing to your strengths or your preference. You want to be thinking bigger picture. You want to be kind of moving at speed. Did that determine my ability to do the job well or not? No. I was as effective as the person next to me, but it took more energy out of me. So, and sometimes a question that does come up off the back of that, in fact, this question was asked of me just the other day, can conservers lead change? Yeah. If conservers are about the detail and the kind of more micro elements of it, can they lead change? And I would say absolutely. And in fact, you can be assured that no stone will be unturned. Things will be considered. But where they might need the support of others in the organization is to help lift the conversation to the vision, connect the change to the overall purpose and strategy of the business, the bigger picture objectives, so people who are looking for that real overarching why can see that, because that might not be what the conserver's focusing on. And likewise, if the originator's leading the change, they absolutely need others to remind them that we have to think things through, think about the impacts, think about the timelines. Have we considered the risks? Have we engaged people? Are we moving so fast and far ahead that everyone's behind thinking, what is this change and how does it affect me and how does it affect my team? And have you considered these impacts? And have you considered the impacts on people? And are you even listening to what people necessarily want and need? And I guess that's one of the big takeaways here. No one style can do it on their own. You absolutely need each of the other two styles to lead change effectively. You need to be thinking about the preferences of each of the styles. You need to be communicating for each of the styles. But in your population, whether it's your team, whether it's your workplace, whether it's the broader community, depending on the kind of work you do, there are conservers, pragmatists, and originators. So the conservers are going to want to see more of that detail. They're going to want to see that you've thought things through. The pragmatists are going to want to feel heard and see that others are being heard. And the originators are probably going to want to see that you're thinking far enough and big enough. And that's where that healthy tension lies. Because when you put the three different types together, if we're not appreciating the difference, the originator gets really annoyed, and I'm generalizing here, but the originator gets really annoyed by the requests for the detail of the conserver. The conserver can get really disappointed with the lack of consideration of the originator. And the pragmatists are going to get upset if they're not feeling heard and included, and they're not allowing others to feel heard and included. When you leverage those differences, it's magic, right? Because the originator can lean on the conserver to think things through. Often they'll say, here, you work on the risk mitigation plan. The pragmatist can run the focus groups and bring people on the journey. And the originator is enabled to think big enough. And also from my experience, this is how tension works, right? Somebody's going to pull a little bit far that way. Somebody's going to pull a little bit far that way. And actually what you want is to rein it to the healthy, balanced place. The pragmatists are your saviors in this case, because the pragmatists are the ones who are going to help the different preferences be heard. And I would say originators probably will be pushing maybe a little bit too far and fast to what the organization can handle at the extreme. Conservers are probably going to be a little bit too conservative. Somewhere in the middle is the dance that the tension leads to that can be a really, really healthy space. So something that's...
Andrew's made a comment. Is that why it's so important to have all styles in a steering or working committee to cover all aspects of the change? And I think you've answered that beautifully. Is there ever a tendency, and I'll put my hand up and admit to being an originator, is there a tendency to surround yourself with people like you and therefore miss some of those sorts of things?
Yeah, I think that's a really, really good question. I think yes. I think, and this is just kind of my experience and observation, human beings tend to feel comfortable with like-minded people. You know, I'm Katrina, as you know, I'm a moderate originator as well. So Katrina and I can have great conversations that are about the big picture stuff. We're not going to get down into the detail. I'm going to enjoy that. You're probably going to enjoy that. And if we were building a team and we were interviewing and recruiting, we might see people who are like us and think, yes, I connect to that person. I agree with that person. They agree with me and my view of the world. So you can have a lot of cohesion around your vision and hiring kind. As a result, there is a risk of creating echo chambers because we're going to reinforce our views of the world. We're going to want to approach things in similar ways. And as a result, what we're missing is the strengths and the perspectives of different types. You know, I guess this is not an inconsistent conversation with diversity and inclusion, because the best outcomes happen when you bring others on board. I would say, as something to think about when you are hiring, be aware of your own biases. Are you appreciating and enjoying that person, that candidate, because they speak similar words to you, they have a similar approach? And if you find yourself being challenged in the interview process, where they're going, let's say, you know, it's you or me, Katrina, hiring, and they're asking for detailed responses about the culture and the way rewards might happen or how work happens, and you're thinking, why are you drilling down so much? Pause, check yourself and think, oh, that person's probably just different to me. Not better, not worse, just different to me. And as a result, maybe that's exactly what I need. Because when you have that range, you have the best possibilities at being effective in your team, but also thinking about your stakeholders in the context of change and beyond. Those people in the organization that you need to partner with and work with. We talk about leading with clarity. That's exactly it. What's going to be clear for me is something that's visionary and purposeful and appealing to my values. What's going to be clear for a pragmatist or a conserver might be a little bit different. Conservers will ask for more detail. And when they say, give me detail, I might think, well, this is detail, but actually they need more detail. Pragmatists might be thinking about how have you involved people. So the more as a team we can think about that, the more we're going to be effective at dealing with our stakeholders. And so some questions always to be thinking about for yourself, but others as well. What excites you about change? What are the things that get you a little bit of a fire in your belly in a positive way when it comes to change? And I'm going to debunk a misconception that often comes up here. Often an assumption is that originators love change, pragmatists depends, conservatives don't like change. They accept it at best and they deal with it. That is a misconception. Every conservative I've ever asked, do you like change? They say yes, and we want to make sure that it's the right change in the situation and details have been thought through. You also want to be thinking about worries or annoys you about change. What worries or annoys you about change? And that may not be the same thing as the person sitting next to you. We have a tendency, or at least I do, I project myself onto others. I think that what excites me about change is going to excite the next person. What worries or annoys me is going to worry or annoy the next person. In fact, it very much depends on their own preferences. And appreciating that and leveraging that for difference, rather than getting annoyed, why are they asking me for that detail? Why are they asking me about who the focus groups and what process we've gone through to include people? Why are they asking me to skip through the detail and just talk about where we're heading in the next 6 months? That's probably coming from their preference because certain things are driving them and some concerns might be at play. Another misconception is that originators always want to lead change and want change just for the sake of it. In fact, I ask this question of originators. I say, do you want change for the sake of change? Is any change good change? Sometimes some originators say, yeah, I don't care, I just want change, it's exciting. More often than not, they say, no, it needs to make sense. It needs to be relevant and applicable to the organization. And we need the others to be thinking through some of those things that our heads just don't go to or we're not interested in. And also often originators say, I'm tired being the person that the organization's always relying on to drive the change. I don't want to be the only driver of change. I want others in the organization to want to lead change as well, so we can partner together. Because often it falls on those people who have done it before, have that orientation, are probably putting their hand up, get excited at the sound of just a possible change. So it's about making sure that responsibility doesn't sit on the shoulders of a few. And I'd also be thinking about in your own teams, have a conversation. What tips would you offer others wanting to get you on board with change? Because when we're speaking from preference and we're sharing our needs and our requests, not only does that allow for us to interact more effectively, we can truly partner and collaborate because we're coming from a place of, I'm sharing this with you because I want us to work towards a common goal together. And if you can have those conversations with your stakeholders, with your peers, with your team members, you're going to be much more clear on what everybody needs and be on the same page. I often say, what feels personal in organizational life is not personal. What feels personal is not personal. What might feel like personal resistance is usually just somebody trying to get their head around things and consider, have we done what we need to do to move forward in this situation? And hopefully the idea of change style preferences gives you a new lens to think about that. So Katrina, I imagine as I've been speaking, this has been spurring questions for others. So what's coming up?
Yeah, look, I do. I always appreciate. I think every time I hear you speak about change, Aviva, I pick up something else, and I think about that reluctance to change, and how we might often think about a person's reluctance to change, which is actually being true to themselves and trying to understand the reasons or the rationale or the details, rather than a reluctance to change. So, it's a really big point to make. I wonder, does your preference change over time? Like, can you kind of learn to adapt or blend with an organization? Can that change?
Yeah. Whether you can learn to adapt or blend is probably a different question to whether your preference changes. I think absolutely everybody can adapt and be flexible, and you probably need to. I don't think you can be very effective in your career if you only ever operate out of one preference, because your job is going to ask you to think about risks and details, to engage people, to be visionary, strategic, to move at pace, depending on the time, depending on the cycle the organization's in, depending on your role as well. If you're not able to adapt and be flexible, you're probably going to apply your default approach, which may or may not serve you in the situation. And if you think about this quote, this idea that what we know is that preference does not equal capacity, it means leading change and managing change, like so many other things as a leader and as a manager, is a skill you need to build. and you can be very, very, very effective at it. So I say absolutely yes, you can blend your style, you can adapt your style, you can be flexible, and you should. But remember that little experiment we did with the right or left-handedness. When you're stressed, when you're rushed, when you're needing to move in a way that's almost unconscious because you've got a lot of other things going on, you probably will default back to your natural preference. The research suggests it is something that's set in you. It's hardwired, just like, I didn't ask to be right-handed, I just am. And like many things, self-awareness is key, because the minute you know this about yourself, in the moment, you can pause, you can reflect on what's going on inside of you and what you want to do, and think, what is going to serve me and my team and the business in this current situation? What approach needs to be applied? And it doesn't always have to be you that does it. If you're a pragmatist and you're the one who wants to run focus groups or run town halls and engage people and listen to people, and again, depending on where you are in the continuum, you can probably tap into different preferences, but you don't need to be the one that's doing the risk mitigation plan. You don't need to be the one sitting with the whiteboard coming up with the vision. Somebody else might be very, very well equipped and excited to do that. And in your teams, where if you're a leader, for example, if you're a manager, you will probably have at least one conserver, originator, and pragmatist in your team. Draw on their strengths. Not only will that create a really good outcome, it's going to motivate the individuals, because from my experience, when people are leveraging their strengths, they come alive, they feel motivated, they're inspired to be really effective in their roles.
Yeah. Wow. Look, we're just going to leave it there, Aviva, because the questions that people have been asking, you've actually addressed a range of them. So thank you for your insights, and also your openness and your genuineness to share your perspective, and also how it's worked for you. It feels like it's a very authentic discussion about the strengths. I guess the next thing that I would like to know is, okay, that's the what. Now, what about the how? And the how is something that people can have a look at if they want to do the 2-day face-to-face managing and leading change short course. That starts on the 9th of October. So please head to our website and find out more. And that will be led by Aviva. So we know you're going to love it. We promise you love it. Everyone loves it. It'll be great to see as many of you as we can there. And so thank you, Aviva, very much. The thanks are starting to come through from our guests as well and our clients as well. So thank you for sharing your views. And I guess for those who can't make the 2-day masterclass with Aviva, before you head out, we also have another October masterclass with Professor Yelchin Akay on data to decisions, navigating the pitfalls of dashboards and unlocking advanced analytics. And you can find the details to register on the MBS events page. Another outstanding masterclass in our series of lunchtime masterclasses with quite a different flavour and a quite a different style. So thank you, everyone, and hope you have a wonderful weekend. And you've really given me something to think about, Aviva, in terms of managing change in my team yet again. Thank you so much.
Pleasure.
Bye,
And look,
everyone.
if this raises any questions, reach out to me. I would be more than happy to help you think through it if you can't make it to the 2-day masterclass.
Oh, lovely. Okay. Thank you. Thanks, everyone. Bye for
Bye,
now.
everybody.